Welcome. It's Saturday, January 10th. We're at Eastport Yacht Club. This hybrid virtual seminar is to help racers and cruisers participating in the A to B or thinking about racing, how to get your ORC rating certificate, which will be the rating that we will be using, or the rating system that we'll be using for the 2026 Annapolis to Bermuda race. I'm Bert Bosser. I'm the event chair. We're joined here remotely by the skipper of Zool. Ben, thank you so much. I'll let you introduce yourself. Ben is a fantastic sailor, very successful in the bay and in the ocean. And we're also joined in the room with John White to answer questions that we may have about ORC. So Ben, to that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Bert. So good morning, everybody. I am happy to be here presenting to you. I'm actually down in Key West, Florida, enjoying the better weather as well as doing a little recuperating. So we'll go through some quick introductions because John White is also there with us. Talk about ORC in general and what it's about, how we use it. Then we'll get a little bit into the different certificate options that are out there, and as well as scoring options, and then the benefits of ORC, some of the other things you can do with your ORC certificate, and then a quick walkthrough of some of the application process. So as Bert mentioned, I am Ben Capuco. I'm actually a naval architect, but my area of my career has really been focused on Navy and commercial and other government ships. So I have a pretty good background in this kind of stuff, but it's not what I do for a living. My boat, it's an Aerodyne 38. I've had it for a little less than 10 years now, I think, and enjoyed it sailing perf. But when we started using ORC, I think I really felt like there was a lot of advantage there. And we'll talk about how ORC and the fact that it is not a single number rating system really has some great advantages, and how it limits some of the every dog has its day aspects of single rating handicaps. As I mentioned, I am down in Key West, and I'm not with you because I just had a hip replacement done 2 days ago. So I'm recovering, and I'm happy to say that through modern science, I'm doing pretty good. Just 2 days after, I'm getting around. Yeah, with a walker, but it's not bad. John White is also with us. John, I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
I'm John White, and just interested in ORC since the beginning on Annapolis, but and I'll try to answer any questions that come up.
All right, thanks, John. And John really, runs the ORC of the Chesapeake, and it is the person who's been driving a lot of ORC on the Chesapeake. So a wealth of knowledge and championships, nationally and internationally. So it's great to have him in the room and running the ORC organization on the Chesapeake. So a little bit of background of what ORC is. ORC itself, the acronym is there for Offshore Racing Congress, which was founded in 1969 by the Royal Ocean Racing Club and the Cruising Club of America to develop handicap standards. ORC itself has actually supported the IOR handicap system, IMS, which came to be after IOR and was also similar to ORC in that it was VPP based, and is currently, running the ORC rating system. So ratings are really, they're based off of the velocity prediction program that was originally generated out of MIT. It is a computer program that was developed to estimate the speed and performance of sailboats in various conditions. It was there as a design tool and then was used for handicapping. So the VPP takes hull, appendage, rig, and other measurements from the Universal Measurement System, which this gets confusing because we also talk about IMS, which is the International Measurement System. So they all use similar or much the same measurements and then plug into a VPP. The VPP is a computer tool that predicts each boat's performance in a full range of wind conditions, essentially creates a matrix of wind speeds, wind angles, and calculates the potential velocity of each yacht. That's used, those predictions are used to generate handicaps over, again, a matrix of wind speeds and course types. And we'll get into that a little bit later on in the presentation. So what sort of certificates can you get from ORC? Well, ORC has several different certificate types. The ones that we'll talk about and the ones that are most applicable to the Annapolis to Bermuda and other racing that we do on the Chesapeake Bay is the ORC Club Certificate and the ORC International Certificate. Now, it's important to understand that these both use the same VP. They use essentially the same measurement system and measurements, but ORC Club is available as a simpler option, which allows an owner to self-declare his measurements. It typically relies on default and estimated measurements, which U.S. Sailing will be involved in applying those. So if you have a vessel that is reasonably common, it's an ideal rating for you, because if there are a number of other, I'll use any sort of J boat, if you have a J35, there are lots of J35s that have been measured and have been rated. And what RC will do through US Sailing is take the default measurements associated with a J35, which will typically be like the lightest J35 that's been measured, and most of the other measurements will be then self-declared by the owner, so the rig measurements, etc. But again, you can work with US Sailing to identify some of those. And then US Sailing will apply that ORC measurement to your vessel and generate a set of ratings. You still have to provide sail measurements to US Sailing to get that full measurement certificate. So it's not quite as simple as just filling out a form like you actually have to get sail measurements for really what turns out to be your largest sails. So your main, your largest Genoa, your largest spinnaker, and then identify if you have other types of sails like code sails, and then provide measurements for them as well. So the next step up is ORC International, and this is a certificate where you actually have measurements taken from your individual boat. You don't typically have to get the hull measured. If there's already been a hull measured that is a sister ship to yours, that will be used, but then other measurements are taken. So full measurement of your vessel in the water, which measures your water lines, does an inclining test to measure the stability of the boat, is done. All the spars and sails have to be fully measured. And then you get a very accurate handicap and measurement of your local. Dobbs Davis is our measurer, and I've got contact information later in the presentation for Dobbs if you're interested in an ORC International certificate. There isn't any separate ORC Performance Cruiser certificate. You use whichever ORC Club or International certificate you have, and then the specifics of the local, or in this case, the events criteria for performance cruiser are applied using your same handicap. So on the Chesapeake, and for this event as well, we use two different classes within ORC. ORC Open, which has no sail or crew limitations outside of what is on your ORC certificate, which will have some sail limitations and crew weight limitations. And then for ORC Performance Cruiser, again, some of the limitations on your certificate, but that is for dual purpose racer cruisers that want to compete with some simplicities such as, limited numbers of sails, etc. And we'll talk a little bit about what that criteria is here. So what I've provided in this slide is the criteria that was used in the last Annapolis to Newport race, which is likely to be very similar to what's going to be applied to the Annapolis to Bermuda race. I think Bert they haven't issued this yet as an amendment to the notice of race, but there will be one issued very soon. So this is again similar to the performance cruiser criteria that's used in ORC of the Chesapeake, with some changes based on the reality that offshore racing does require some additional sails for safety purposes. But to qualify for the performance cruiser, again, you need to have your ORC certificate, and on that certificate, your yacht must be classified as an IMS cruiser racer. What that means is your certificate, your measurement has identified that on your vessel you have cruiser type amenities. So to qualify, you have to have, a salon table, you have to have an enclosed head, you have to have berths for, a number of your crew, you have to have stowage, etc. So it is you to what should be a typical cruiser racer type vessel and not a stripped out racing machine.
Hey, Ben, sorry, I stepped out to talk about the stability rating. You had a question maybe for me about the performance cruiser, the NOR?
Yeah, so working with Dobbs Davis, who is our local measurer as well as the US ORC employee, essentially. He had some concerns about making sure that the stability criteria that's identified for Annapolis to Bermuda is well understood, and folks entering understand what the criteria means and what they have to do to ensure that they meet that criteria. Looking at the notice of race, you've identified the stability index that's in the ORC certificate, which you only get when you have a full ORC international certificate. So I think what you have done and what has been done for Annapolis to Newport is, if you don't have that, you can use a sister ship that has that stability criteria. There's some other stability criteria that you've identified which can also be applied, and working with the vessel manufacturer or naval architect, you can ensure that you've met that stability criteria.
Yeah, so that's exactly what John and I were talking about, our safety chairs here. I think maybe not give a political answer. I'll say we're going to try and work with all parties. The intent in us going to ORC only is we're going to encourage people to do the fully measured process, because I think it is valuable to get all of those ratings specific to your boat. It is pricey though. And for our cruiser class, we still want to allow them the option to use the club certificate and work with them to identify equal stability ratings from other sources, we'll say, especially in their first year or so, when they're just figuring out this ORC thing. So I think if we work with all parties, we'll do the right thing by everybody. And we're excited about that. And we'll obviously connect Dobbs with the fleet and encourage them to do that. Then what we don't want is that every boat in the race has to have a fully measured international certificate, because it is, especially in the beginning, when you're figuring this out, it's a significant investment. It's a bit overwhelming. And so I think if you can identify your stability rating index from other trusted sources, then I still think that's an appropriate way for them to do it in the initial outset.
Yeah. Bob's concern is that you just need to be sure that the sister ship you're using is truly a similar, configuration as your own boat. So for instance, if you have in-mast roller furling and the sister ship doesn't, then we really need to look pretty hard at what the stability index is, and if there's another sister ship out there that's somehow been measured, to ensure that you still have the stability criteria. Likewise, shoal draft versus deep draft. Just need to make sure that it's truly a sister ship if you're going that route.
Don, do you want to add it?
No, I think you clarified it. We'll look at that carefully.
All right, I've got one item, a detail to add. So as recently as last year, if you had a club certificate and you had Dobbs do the flotation and inclining only, and not the full-blown international certificate, that's measured data, and it would show on the certificate. So there are a handful of club certificates that have the stability data officially. So that's a much less expensive way to get it.
Okay.
A lot easier. You don't have to unstep, and so it can be done.
We're going to work with everybody involved to make sure that we're doing right by everybody and leveraging the resources we have. I'll say that one. Ben, I'll kick it back to you and I'll put us back on mute. I don't see any questions.
Okay. So continuing with the performance cruiser criteria, I think the plan would be to have the performance cruisers have a limit in the number of head sails. So only 2 head sails with an area greater than 90%. So only those 2 can be flown or, carried on board and flown. No restrictions for any head sails smaller than 90%. And then only 1 head sail can be flown at a time unless a second is flown from a fixed inner forestay. So that allows for cutter type rigs, but does limit the size of that sail, and I think still limits the ability to fly spinnaker or Genoa staysail. And John White, if you can clarify that, that would be great.
If I can remember correctly, I think that spinnaker staysails were just outlawed. And the staysail on a cutter rig had to fit the criteria where it was a luffed head sail, which means that it's attached to an inner forestay to try to not have, a set flying double head rig, because we're trying to make it more crew friendly. So I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's pretty well written in the AYC document from last year's AYC race, the race to Newport. Where it gets interesting and the tough one is the additional sail provision to try and find a way around, very modern boats that have just small non-overlapping jibs to be able to compete against the boats with overlapping jibs, and how do they mesh together in certain conditions. And so the additional sail provision was a way to get around that. Some coaching was also provided by US Sailing to help get there, which was helpful. So that'll be an important one, I think, to pay attention to.
Yeah. So as you can see, the Annapolis to Newport criteria, you 1 spinnaker, and then you could have 1 additional sail, like John said, and that could be an additional spinnaker, code 0, or head sail set flying, which is sort of like a, what folks might commonly call like a reaching code sail. Again, the thought there being simplify things, limit the number of, you don't have a huge quiver of sails on a typical performance cruiser. If you want to race with that full quiver of every type of sail, then you should probably be racing in the ORC Open class.
Question for you, Ben and John, since it's the first time for me doing this as a bench chair, and obviously working with Sharon and others. But when you establish a performance cruiser class, is it we're choosing whatever head sail configuration they're allowed to have? Like, let's say we have 2 fleets of performance cruiser. You subdivide them into, like, performance cruiser 1 would have a different set of sails than performance cruiser 2, or it's just this applies, and then if you have enough boats that because of ratings you need 2 fleets, but they're all against the same criteria.
There is no breakdown on the certificate. That class is what you make of it, and that's an interesting thought. In practice, I think you find that the boats come so diverse that that's a tough question to resolve.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could sort of make arguments in 2 different ways. The simplest is based on rating, and then you have boats that are rated to be similar speeds sailing against each other. But you could have a fairly a more modern, smaller boat than racing against an older, very heavy boat, which could be a bit odd. But I think it's still, the concept of having classes finish in a similar time frame is certainly the most common way to split up fleets. It's tough. That's a tough one.
Okay, we won't hold your feet to the fire too much. But,
Right, and then the last criteria that was again that's used on the Chesapeake and was used in Annapolis to Newport. Weight of the crew is limited to what's declared on your certificate, and you're only allowed a maximum of 1 professional sailor on board who can't steer. On the Chesapeake, that's further limited, but this is the criteria that I believe was used for Annapolis to Newport. And again, it's laid out in the last NOR for the 25 Annapolis to Newport if you're interested in just, using that criteria. So if we move on to scoring, this is really where ORC differentiates from other rating systems. So the big difference is we're not a single or maybe a two rating type single number system. It is this matrix of possible scoring options. The ratings are calculated, they're not assigned. They are based on the performance of each boat combined with the scoring model associated with the wind conditions in that race. So you're going to have multiple ratings depending on the course type, whether it's, for the actual ORC certificate, whether it's windward leeward or whether it's predominantly, upwind, predominantly downwind. There are a number of other scoring options that I'll talk about in a little more detail in the next slide. But the concept here is that this is the most fair approach to handicapping, and it limits the every dog has its day kind of a situation. So we all have experienced under perf and under other systems that there are boats that really perform much better in light winds than in heavy winds, or the opposite, downwind versus upwind, that might have the same perf rating. So two boats with the same perf rating doing Governor's Cup race that is all downwind might have wildly different performance. If one is modern boat with an asymmetric spinnaker versus a heavier older boat with the symmetric spinnaker, for example, if it was a downwind or reaching race. And that's the kind of situation that ORC is trying to avoid and help, handicap with equal handicaps in all conditions. So there's a couple different levels that can be used, and race committees can select these, but there's some simple options which are, again, single numbers, but based on windward, leeward, or all purpose. So this is really the equivalent of kind of the perf type rating, where it's mostly associated with a single number rating, but doesn't really bring into account wind speeds and other aspects. So for the all-purpose single number, it assumes a wide range of wind conditions and an averaging of those conditions, which is fine if you have a race that actually has a wide range of conditions, and then you're scoring it pretty well. But that's tough to achieve. You can have that in a long distance type race, but you certainly won't always have that, and probably rarely have that, quite frankly. So the more complex scoring options which are offered under ORC are the ones that really start to differentiate the rating system from perf type ratings. So here now we've got a triple number rating system where we can look at low, medium, and high wind speeds in again an averaging of angles. That same triple number windward leeward type course, a single number where it's predominantly upwind, predominantly reaching, predominantly downwind, and you can see all the rest here. I won't read through each one, but this is just a pull from a certificate. This one might have been mine, I'm not sure, that shows all those course options. In the United States, there's also some events that have identified their own particular courses, and they've looked at historically what the wind conditions have been in terms of wind angles, etc. And then they have some options for their particular course that have been generated. We've also, in the US, generated a 5-band, which goes beyond the 3-band that ORC across the world uses. So the 5-band does some further differentiating in wind speeds, and that, again, just helps to be a little bit more accurate. The critical part of any of these is identifying what's appropriate for the actual conditions that are seen on the course. And that's really one of the more challenging aspects of ORC for the race committee. So identifying if it's really a low medium wind speed, medium high, etc., can be quite a challenge. There are aspects of identifying that wind speed that you're seeing on the race course and how you're applying ORC that are challenging. But when it's done right, it's a very accurate scoring system and really to every competitor's advantage, because now you are really working on a level playing field with your competition. So for distance races, typically you would want to look at predominantly upwind, predominantly reaching, predominantly downwind. That can be done for various wind speeds. You can use the simpler scoring that we talked about earlier. And here you can see what the percentage of upwind, downwind, and reaching that's been applied to those single number type systems or type ratings that are provided through ORC. ORC is now providing an option for something called the weather routing scoring. And this is really arguably the most accurate method of rating. And what it does is it takes each boat's, polars, the polars that are generated on your certificate. It uses inputs from the predict wind routing system and takes the weather predictions for that race, the grid files that you can get, applies those to the route predict wind routing system would identify from start to finish for the fastest route. And then each boat's rating is determined from that routing. So for something like Annapolis to Bermuda, this scoring system would actually take each boat's polars, run it through their routing system and say your CNC 44 sailing upwind in light air in the Chesapeake, because that's what's predicted getting out of the Chesapeake, will have this performance when you turn the corner and start heading to Bermuda, and now you're on a broad reach. You're expected to have, a new performance, and you should finish in, X number of days. That's applied to every boat, and then that creates your rating. And so if you have exceeded that prediction by sailing identifying better wind conditions, sailing above your rating somehow, then you're gonna win. If you don't, then other boats will score higher than you. So it's been applied on a number of regattas. It's been used as a secondary scoring system, and they've been able to prove that it is quite accurate. And I think it's something that you might want to consider. And I don't know, John, if you want to elaborate on any of that or provide any of your thoughts there.
I think it was successful for the last Newport Bermuda Race and well thought of. It has not yet been done involving the Chesapeake because of the weirdness we have right here.
This is what the Newport did, the forecasted time correction factor.
And it's done it's done immediately before the race, and they distribute the handicaps for each boat in the just a couple of hours before the race starts. All that I've heard have been good things about it, but maybe they got lucky. But it's still kind of new. It's just been around for a few years, and it's gaining adoption. Certainly there are risks involved because of the difficulty in forecasting here.
Is there a hybrid option to only do the ocean leg, whereas for particularly is more accurate?
But you'd think there might be, but it hasn't been done yet. And then the problem is just the hybrid gets you in trouble because everybody would have a different start time when they exit. So there's some tough questions to resolve there.
One question too, this is of course based on the predicted winds just prior to the beginning of the race. But for like a Bermuda race where now you're looking at 4 or 5 day race, those predictions can be considerably different than the actual conditions that the boats experience, especially as you get on to day 2, 3, 4, or 5. Is there an option within this to actually look at what the actual condition that were experienced by the boats as an input towards this optimal rating system?
Understanding of it to date anyway has been you'd choose one path or the other. And I'm unaware of any races that have started on the Chesapeake having used the weather routing scoring.
I think the one argument you could make on the Chesapeake is that when you're using weather routing scoring, because you're, the question that was posed earlier was, could you use something different on the Chesapeake versus in the ocean? But at least on the Chesapeake, you're using HRR, you know, near term weather predictions that are probably most likely more accurate. So you're going to have a little more accuracy in the Chesapeake versus out in the ocean. But then again, out in the ocean, you probably have better understanding of what the weather conditions are going to be on that longer scale weather estimating. You know, it's something to think about. You know, there are other, you know, in order to do what you're talking about using the actual weather conditions, I think that can be done, but again, gets really complicated. And that is done in some, you know, world championship, has been done in the past in some world championship events, etc. But it's not a simple thing that you can apply easily to a long distance race like this.
Just hearing this, and I know they used it, the Newport to Bermuda, but my first reaction to this is I feel like now not only am I racing against the other boats in my class, but I'm also racing against the weather router and who's got the better weather router, which I guess you could say if people are using routing or not using routing, you're already doing that, but now it's affecting my actual performance rate.
So I think I will speak for the PRO. We're not going to do this graduate level math because of the reasons that John identified. And I have been through this Newport, but when they did that, I wouldn't say it's like they published all of the grids. They said, here's the route you should sail. If you don't, or if it's not true, that's on you. Now they did dump it in the morning. So 9 a.m., the start of the race, that like the whole deck was reshuffled. We're not going to do that. But so it was a little bit unnerving because then you're like, okay, like, because everything changed by change. But yeah, they were very transparent about it. And they published, if you go on the Newport Bermuda website, they published a report statistically showing how better it was with real math. So I encourage you to go read that report because they took a lot of time to say like what they did and how they felt it was better comparatively to others. But just since we're recording, our intent isn't to do this. We just don't feel we're ready or it's appropriate for us, but it's out there.
It's out there, and you know, it is ORC and U.S. Sailing that apply those ratings. So it's not the local, you know, race committee that has to run the program or something. But you're right. For all the reasons you just mentioned, it adds a level of complexity, requires a level of understanding by the competitors that is maybe a bridge too far for this year. But it could also be an interesting just secondary scoring for you to see how it might work out for the next cycle. So you could ask that ORC generate those ratings and score for folks against it just to see how it compares to what you do select in the end.
And my understanding, Ben and John, is that if a race committee decides they want to do that, you contact U.S. Sailing actually does it. You said like that they have the fleet and then they run the numbers for you is what I was told. But maybe that's wrong. Like the Newport race committee didn't do all that math. U.S. Sailing helped them do that. You had to tell them enough time that you wanted to do this total forecasted TCF, and then they would assist you with it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You want to get that going early.
We're not going to do that. So we're not like, it's not on us to like do the math. It's done by.
And I think we've already talked through this. I should have flipped to this slide earlier, but there is a fee for doing that as well. So, you know, great idea, but it's also going to cost a little more for the organizing committee. Here's a look at an ORC certificate. This is a 2025 certificate. I don't believe there's going to be a lot of changes in 2026. Some of the customized scoring in the U.S. may be changed because there's some additional local events that I think are going to be added. But on this certificate, you can see I'll highlight a couple things. The sail limitations, I think, are good to understand how many, you know, sails you can have, sail limits for head sails and spinnakers. Here's your stability that's generated out of the certificate. Sail areas are calculated based on the sails that you've declared. The crew weight is identified on your certificate. So you can either declare a crew weight, where when you apply for your certificate, you tell them what your anticipated crew weight is, and then you can't go above that crew weight. Or you can let ORC use a default, which is based on a formula they use for length of the boat, etc. And you'll get your crew weight limit, which then you need to make sure if that weight limit, you need to make sure you're not carrying more crew than that weight limit for your ORC certificate. But for offshore, that's not typically an issue. That's more of a inshore racing problem where folks might want to load up 11 people on the rail for a windward leeward race or something when they really should only have 9.
Speaking of weight, it used to be that you could actually measure all of your gear to get and put that in and it would affect your rating. And then I think they went to like maybe like a default, assuming that like an average boat that goes offshore has so much. Do you know if that's changed at all or what the process is for that?
Yeah, so if you get a full, actually with either certificate really, but the boat is rated essentially empty. You're measured without sails on board, without any of your stuff that you have in your lockers, without crew gear, it's it is an empty boat. It's actually a good exercise if you want to just get weight off your boat because you're forced to empty all those nooks and crannies and realize that you're carrying stuff around that you never need, and you'll end up taking a lot of weight off your boat just going through the process. The boat is measured empty, and then you're right, there's assumed or calculated weights for sails and other equipment based on the length and type of boat. So it's not based on your actual gear that you're carrying. So if you have a heavier life raft than somebody else, you're carrying the extra weight of your heavier life raft. It just is what it is along those lines. So again, just going through the certificate at the top of page 1, you get the scale drawing of your boat. This is actually good to just do a quick check that your boat, or if you're looking at somebody else's, you can understand what's assumed in the rating in terms of symmetric or asymmetric spinnaker, what kind of roach in the main is included, whether there's a fat head or simple roach main, etc. And those things are kind of important just to check your own certificate or a sister ship certificate that you're trying to use for stability is equivalent to your boat. And the pictorial is a nice way to do that. Rig dimensions are shown on there. And then in the table, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can find whether your IMS division, your IMS here is the International Measurement System, has identified you as a cruiser racer. So that's important for the cruiser racer class. That needs to show on your certificate. On the bottom is the rated speed at various wind angles. Also, maximum sail areas and sail inventories are included in the table that's at the bottom. And I kind of pointed that out on the previous slide. And then the stability factor that we've talked about quite a bit already. The scoring options shown on page 2, we've got single number, triple number, and the 5-band models that I touched on earlier. And then there's time on distance as well as time on time identified for each scoring option. So time on distance is what we're all used to so that you can, per mile, this is seconds per mile. So the difference between one boat and another in seconds per mile can be calculated there. Time is calculated using time recorded for the finish against your rating. And then again, some different scoring options that we talked about earlier, predominantly upwind, predominantly downwind, etc. I don't have the latest certificate pricing, but this is what the costs were last year. So getting an international certificate is more expensive, especially for the first time around. Club certificates are less expensive, and then renewals are also less expensive between club and international. There's also a line here for amended. So if you are interested in modifying your certificate, maybe for a change in the configuration of your boat, you bought a new sail mid-season, or you've decided that you never use your largest A2 or it's torn and you want to get re-rated, there is a cost to be re-rated, and that's what that amended cost is. I'll emphasize here that getting your information into U.S. Sailing to get your certificate is a good idea. They can turn these around pretty quickly, but the sooner the better. And I'll show you a little bit of how that process works. When you do have your certificate, when you've paid for generating a certificate, then you get access to some additional benefits through ORC. And these are actually quite nice. There's a database of certificates that you can access. So you can look up your competitors' certificates and understand what the configuration of their boat is. You can generate a scratch sheet like the one shown here on this slide. So if you identify all the boats in your event, you can actually generate a scratch sheet. You can see here that it gives you increments of time. You can adjust those. So what I might typically do is, pull the folks that are in my division, identify those, generate a spreadsheet, and include in that 1 minute for a distance race isn't worthwhile, but you might do a 10-minute increment, 3 hours, 8 hours, and then you just multiply out what those ratings are for how long the race is anticipated, and you can get an estimated time between different boats. And that's what's kind of being shown here. So if you actually had 300 race, the boat Palomino, I don't even know how to pronounce that, J145, would owe the Hans 348 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 30 seconds. If you have a 600-minute race, you just multiply that by 2. If it's a 660-minute race, you add on the 60 minutes on top of that. So it's a nice way to get an estimated time allowance between you and your competitors, or as you cross the finish line, understand what your finish should look like against those competitors.
Question here.
For someone new in the sport, if they start out with a club certificate, does the data collected for that certificate, can it be applied later to an international certificate to keep the costs down for that added information?
I'm going to say yes and no. So yes, in that if you have gone through the process of getting your stability estimated, then the cost of that measurement will be reduced. If you've had to pay a sailmaker for your sail measurements, and usually you get sail measurements when you buy the sail, but if you have older sails, you'll have to bring them to a sailmaker and get them to measure it. You won't have the cost of that if you go from a club certificate to international. But to my understanding, there isn't a reduced fee for moving from one to the other mid-season or something, or from year to year. Not to my knowledge. Like the direct cost that you pay U.S. Sailing, I don't think would change. The other nice thing that you can do for those that are inclined is run trial certificates. What that allows you to do is look at would change in your rating if you made sail changes, for instance, or rig changes, modified your crew weight. You can do other, more esoteric things with trying to change other parameters, but these are kind of the typical ones you might look at. So to optimize your rating, especially for a particular event, you might want to look at what would the rating benefit be, and is it worth it to, drop a sail from my quiver for a certain event, because this offshore race is probably going to be windy. I don't need some sail that I have in my quiver, or quite the opposite, right? So you can do some of those things, and so that's a nice option that you get from Sailor Services through ORC. You'll also get a speed guide. Well, I'm sorry, you some additional cost. You can get a speed guide, which gives you graphic and tabular information about the performance of your boat. So it's a nice element that can be provided. With that, you'll actually get a digital file of your polars that can be brought into expedition or other your B&G instruments, etc. So it'll give you that information in a digital way that can be directly brought in. And you can get target speed. So this is something that most folks might want. It can be generated off of the basic ORC certificate that you get, or if you pay for it, you'll get a nicely laid out target speed table like the one shown here. So for windward leeward racing, you'll see what your target speeds are upwind and downwind, and those are your best performance speeds against the polar of your boat. So it gives you a good idea of what your true wind angle downwind should be and what boat speed you should be able to achieve. So if you're sailing faster than that, you know you're pretty good. If you're able to sail lower than the target and still make the speed, you know you're doing the right thing on the boat. So now I'll talk a little bit about applying for your ORC certificate. So the first thing to do is go online to US Sailing. When you do that, you need to have a US Sailing membership. So you need to be a US Sailing member. So you should have already done that. Go online, log in, and then, identify whether you're looking for a new club or an international certificate. And if you've already had another certificate, you can revalidate your information there. And if you have an ORR certificate, you can convert from ORR into ORC. So some boats that have been measured and sailed in ORR races, like previous Newport to Bermudas, can use that. Can use that information to generate an ORC certificate and save some cost and effort in identifying all those measurements. US Sailing then will receive that. They'll respond with questions. You're going to need to reach out to a sailmaker, or if you have all the measurement certificates from sails that you've purchased, you provide those to US Sailing, and then they'll take that and generate your personal ORC certificate based on the configuration of your particular boat and the sails that you're carrying. So ORC promises that they can issue certificates in as little as a week, but it can be a problem coming up to events like the Bermuda Race, Mackinac Race, etc. So the earlier you can get that information in and start the process, the better you're going to be. Couple links at the bottom of this page for questions or concerns you can send to US Sailing to get help, or to Dobbs Davis, who is local to Annapolis, and he can help out. And as it says here, Dobbs is not only a measurer, but he is the ORC communications director here in the US. Additional data that will be required as you're going through these steps: a boat ID. US Sailing assigns everyone a unique boat ID. So if you already have that from having a previous certificate, you'll have that ID that immediately pulls up your certificate. If you've never been rated, then they'll assign an ID to your US Sailing member ID. You'll need that. As I mentioned, you'll have to join US Sailing if you're not already a member. You should know what your crew weight is if you want to declare your maximum crew weight. If not, you'll get the default crew weight, which is usually pretty reasonable for your boat, but you're often better off declaring a crew weight if you really know what your crew weight's going to be. And then identifying the first race that you're going to be sailing. So US Sailing tries to prioritize these applications based on the first race that you're going to sail. In Annapolis, that's often the first Wednesday night race, but let them know what your first race is so they can try and get your certificate done in a timely manner. Again, sail certificates, you're going to need that. Sailmaker can generate these and will for you, and any modification details. So if you have, especially for the club certificates, if you have any modifications that change it from the stock boat, identify those, and then US Sailing will work with you to generate your certificate based on those modifications. If you make any changes over the winter and you've got other modifications, also identify those, and US Sailing will make adjustments there. So if you changed your boom length, etc., make sure US Sailing knows that, and that'll come out in that measurement as well as sail measurements. Last slide here is some resources again where you can get information on ORC, ORC of the Chesapeake, where you can go for your applications, boat measurement, etc. So that's it for the formal presentation. If there's any questions.
Start with any questions online. Free just to jump in or put them in chat. If not, we'll go to the room. Anybody have questions in the room? I didn't have a couple just added because it's being recorded, some pre-baked questions that I want. In your presentation, you highlighted that on the certificate, it'll say performance or racer cruiser. Is that like high-end performance race sled and like racer cruiser is your typical, we'll call it monohull? Or is that's not necessarily associated with if we have a performance cruiser class? Like you'll get, if you're just going to do like a club cert, will it segregate you between a normal racer or his cruiser?
So the way ORC identifies racer cruiser, as I mentioned earlier, is based on the configuration of the boat. So you have to have some cruising amenities on your boat to get that identifier on the certificate. To typically race in a performance cruiser class, you'll need to have that identified on your certificate. You want to avoid having a stripped out, Soto 40 sailing in the racer cruiser class, right? So a Soto 40 is not going to get that designation because they don't typically have an enclosed head and a galley and a salon table, etc. That's required to get that identification on your certificate. But beyond that, that's all that happens there. So there isn't any additional modifications to the rating based on the other racer cruiser limitations that you may identify. Beyond that, if you have limited the number of sails and racing with those number of sails, hopefully your certificate reflects that. So I guess the example I might use is if you've chosen in the criteria that we used for Annapolis to Newport, as an example, if you've chosen to sail with a second spinnaker and not with a code 0 because you think that's the configuration you'd like to race with going to Newport, you might want to consider not getting your rating generated with the code 0 that you're planning on leaving on shore if you own one. I hope that's not too confusing, but
So yes. So for like a typical racer cruiser boat that has a galley, has a head, you want to do the race, and you go back on the bay, you're going to be listed as a racer cruiser. And then whether you choose to show up with all of your sails and be an ORC Open or the performance cruiser class, you have a normal certificate, the club certificate, make sure the stability rating's fine. And then you opt into whether you want to be ORC Open or performance cruiser class, and only want to have a couple sails.
that's right.
Question was, how long are the certificates good for?
They're good for a year. All the rating information is good for as long as you don't change things. So if you haven't bought any new sails or made any changes, you'll be able to just apply for a new certificate, and it's as simple as that. I mean, you still have to pay for it, so it's only good for a year because the VPP is changed every year. ORC is constantly tweaking the VPP to make sure that it reflects the latest technology and lessons learned from past events. So if you follow Scuttlebutt or some of the other sailing newsletters, you might have heard about ORC World Championship. There's an X-boat that was designed to really take advantage of what was essentially kind of a loophole in the VPP. The VPP is based on data that's been developed over years. Folks at X Yachts identified that if they went to the limit of some of the measurement criteria, the VPP was estimating the performance much different than the actual performance of the boat. So it added additional resistance to the calculated resistance of the hull that was beyond what you'd actually achieve. So in that case, the boat might plane earlier than was calculated, and so they had a rating advantage. ORC is now closing that loophole, so the VPP is going to be adjusted so that it has a broader range of measurements, and that calculation for, in this case, it was residuary resistance, will be more accurate, and those boats will be rated slightly differently. So that happens every year. There's some adjustments, and so you need to get a new certificate every year because it's going to be based on that year's VPP.
Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions, so I think we'll wrap up, Ben. I just want to say thank you very much. Great presentation. We really appreciate it, and wishing you well in Key West. It's probably cold, wet, and miserable at Seaport.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There was one other question that just popped up. If there, where do you find out if there are sister ships? I guess there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. You can get that off of the ORC database, but if you don't already have an ORC certificate, you're probably going to struggle to be able to do that. Simple Google searches will probably identify some of the sister ships, but if you reach out to me or Dobbs Davis, and we'll make sure that this file, the PowerPoint's available to everybody who's here, and you get those links. If you reach out to one of us, we can help you identify sister ships that have already been rated and help you with that process. All right. I think that was that pop-up question. I just wanted to address that one.
Great. And for everybody, we'll post the slides, we'll post the recording links. It'll be in the yacht scoring reference, and you can reach out to us at the organizing committee to answer any follow-up questions as well as needed, and we'll work with the folks. Just to reiterate, the intent of using ORC is to curate, I think, the best race we can, given the diversity of boats that we have that fall within high performance racing, but also a lot of cruisers, and we want to give them a good race experience. We had to make a decision about which racing category to use. We haven't made a final decision about the performance cruiser class yet. Having this being our first time doing it, we're trying to make the best judgment after we get the last tranche, I'd say, of boats that have registered. So we're trying to work with everybody to do that. And so we'll be on standby to answer more questions. And then lastly, we have events planned. Look at the website. We'll have an event in February focused on probably communications. And in March, we're going to do another safety and training seminar. That'll be mid-March. And then in mid-April, we'll have a skipper and navigators roundtable here at EYC to go over everything from getting down the bay, out in the ocean, and things you want to think about from your equipment and your routing. And you'll get to hear from experienced navigators and past skippers on approaches they've had. So thanks everybody for attending. Look forward to seeing you in our next events. And thank you again, Ben. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a great day, and good luck in the race, and good luck preparing for it.
Thank you all.